Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to day 2 of the Macroeconomics and Policy Conference. As we continue our discussions on critical macroeconomic and policy issues, we look forward to another day of stimulating ideas and insightful deliberations. Like I said yesterday, this conference is particularly special because it marks the beginning of Institute's Golden Jubilee Conference Series, commemorating 50 years of contribution to research and policy discourse. Today's proceedings, we will begin with an invited lecture on inequality, automation, and economic growth by Dr. Moushami Das. Dr. Moushami Das is a professor at Delhi School of Economics with research interests in the area of macroeconomics, economic growth and development economics. Professor Das' work has made significant contributions to our understanding of macroeconomics, growth, inequality, and development, and we look forward to an insightful discussion. The session will be chaired by Dr. Meeta K. Mehra. Dr. Mehra is a professor at JNU. She has a distinguished body of work spanning macroeconomics, international economics, growth, and sustainability issues. Her research has significantly contributed to understanding the interaction between economic development, globalization, and long-term growth dynamics. May I invite now Professor Mehra to take over the proceedings. Over to you.
Thank you, Resham. It's a real pleasure to be here. I wanted to thank the director and the organizing committee for inviting me to this very special kind of, kickoff discourse that relates to the Golden Jubilee. This is a very, very relevant and topical subject relating to inequality, automation, and economic growth. And who else than Professor Moushami Das to actually allude to it and share her thoughts. Just to set the stage for, what really, for us economists, what is really sort of the underlying kind of themes that need to be sort of addressed. AI and automation, we all know, spur growth. We have witnessed that, but the distributional gains are very unevenly distributed. And the distributional pressures, when you try and understand them from the lens of economics, they're theoretically complex, institutionally mediated, and very contingent upon the development stage of economies. There are task-based models of macroeconomics, essentially due to Acemoglu and Restrepo, Otter, and all, that look at the displacement and reinstatement trade-off as being central drivers. There is the capital labor substitution kind of mechanism, and also more recently the monopsony models that do not allow productivity gains to actually trickle down to labor. Especially if you were focusing on the gig economy, their bargaining power is really sort of curtailed. There are endogenous growth theories that look at the role of innovation, market structure, and of course there is development economics that's looking at, all of Roderick's, grave risk of premature deindustrialization, especially for labor-abundant countries where, robotization may actually erode the low-cost comparative advantage of labor and sort of take back those tasks to the developed world. So given, the interface between macro and development economics, I think, the stage is set for, more rigorous analysis, and who else is better than Professor Das to sort of allude to the topic. Over to you.
Thank you, Meeta, for that very generous introduction, and thank you, Kavita, for inviting me for this. The title of the paper has changed a little bit. The first term was earlier inequality. Now I call it capital scarcity because I realized that I'm really talking about inter-country inequality or capital rich vis-a-vis capital poor. So inequality seemed to me a bit of a misnomer because it's trying to suggest within country inequality. And of course, there's, as Meeta suggested, suggested. There are a lot of work on this, especially within country inequality. And I'm going to take a slightly different route. I'm going to bring up questions which are probably slightly different from what has been analyzed so far. A lot of analysis has gone on into deciding who are the gainers, who are the losers of this automation within a country, what is the distributional impact, and so on and so forth. I'll think about a country as a homogeneous. I mean, those issues are important, but I'm going to ignore them, and I'm going to look at the path of automation that you see across countries and try to see why that path is the way it is and what is its implications for long-term growth for these countries. So I'm going to, when I talk about inequality, or capital scarcity, I'm specifically talking about countries, not within countries. So at least in this particular paper, we are going to abstract away from within country inequality. The second thing that I want to point out is that basically, I think that there is a difference, the perspective differs in terms of automation technology or any modern technology if you're thinking about different developed countries vis-a-vis the developing countries. So my particular paper's motivation as well as the framework that we work on are sort of trying to make that distinction between developed and developing countries and try to eventually get into some policy questions. My paper is analytical. It's kind of starts with a structure. I will not bore you with the details of the structures, but I'll tell you exactly what are the crucial steps that takes us to the fundamental conclusions that we derive from this structure. And then, of course, the more important part eventually where I'm hoping to get your feedback is about the policy implications of that structure, if the structure looks convincing to you. This is a joint work with Ayana Bhattacharjee and Mukta Jain. Mukta Jain was a PhD student at Delhi School of Economics. She's now graduated and is a faculty at Jindal Law School, and Ayana is at IMI, and I'm at Delhi School. So just to give you a motivation for this talk, which is that we all know that automation is kind of happening at a large scale. It's a technological breakthrough, which is sort of changing the production process all across the globe. And these are sort of relatively easily available to across countries and so on and so forth. So the technological barriers or availability of technology seems to be not so much of a problem for different countries, but yet you find a lot of difference in terms of adoption rates of these AI technologies or automation technologies. So when you look at the data, you find that the advanced economies are adopting this technologies at a much faster rate than developing countries, which is sort of not a new result or new fact. It has been happening with all kind of other technologies previously as well. But I think given the accessibility of these technologies, that kind of it's a bit striking that it's not widely adopted across all countries. And I'll have more to say about that productivity benefits, but the point is it is generally accepted that they are highly productive in terms of overall contribution to the TFP. So this particular chart, that bar diagram that I have over there is coming from World Robot Statistics Report, which basically says that if you look at the adoption rate of robots and across different countries, it's still really the high developed capital rich countries which have a very high adoption rates in terms of how the industrial robots and so on. The one country that you can sort of relate to, which is not belong to this club of very 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 traditionally well developed countries, is China, which is at the last column. But even China is not really comparable to the other countries, even though it's growing at a very fast rate for over decades now. So in some sense, therefore, to us, at least, it seems that it is a bit of a puzzle, because it is more of a puzzle because there exists substantive literature which basically says that this kind of automation technologies are more sort of, they are going to substitute more for good substitute for low skill jobs. So low skill mechanical jobs. And there are papers which try to say that they are more, those jobs, routine manual jobs are more likely to be automated than jobs which are require specialized skills and so on. So therefore, the question is that since developing countries have a larger share of this routine manual jobs, why is it that the countries are not adopting automation as fast as, why is it that that's where the potential for automation exists? Why is it that potential is not being realized? So that to us is a bit of a puzzle, because here are a set of countries which are tremendously can be automated, but yet effectively when you look at the data, they are not going for automation. And we are trying to find an answer to this particular empirical puzzle, and our answer lies sort of predictably on the fact that these are also economies which are capital scarce. And we are going to relate capital scarcity to the adoption of this kind of technologies. And we are going to bring forward the hypothesis that basically it's this, there is a complementarity between conventional capital and all this new kind of automation technologies. And that can act as a sort of, economic disincentive for countries to adopt this kind of technology, even when they are freely available. Now, the existing literature talks about availability of latest technologies, whether they are equally available to all countries or not. So that's one reason that could hamper technology adoption by the less developed economies or capital scarce economies. There's another set of results which says that the political economy can hamper technology adoption. We are trying to bring forward a third incentive, which is basically saying that this may not be even optimal for this kind of economies to adopt the latest technology, provided that the latest technology entails some kind of, complementarity across or a redistribution of capital, which is scarce in these countries. So that is going to be our main sort of, line of argument in this paper. So related to that, we ask 4 very specific research questions. One is that why is it that countries, in laissez-faire countries without any government intervention, the countries adopt different automation technologies at different rates? Why is it that if the technology is freely available, not all countries are basically adopting to the latest technologies? And then the second question is that, is there a role for capital scarcity and savings behavior of these economies in influencing this path of automation adoption? The third is that what is the implication of this in terms of the long run growth trajectories of this economy? And the fourth one, which sort of, came up as a byproduct of our model structure, and, it's something that we are sort of interested to explore along with you, is that given the structure that we have, and if capital becomes a scarce factor, our model structure shows that the automation then may or may not continue indefinitely. Eventually, it might get saturated because it's tagged to the capital accumulation rate. So that's one byproduct of our result, and we are going to explore that, that aspect in the context of our model, and eventually, of course, get feedback from you about the viability of this structure. So the core mechanism, as I've already highlighted, is just going to be, basically focus on the fact that conventional capital, for example, physical machinery and tools, and all kind of, infrastructural capital like roads, airports, bridges, and, shipyards, and so on and so forth. This is where conventional capital gives you returns. And as opposed to that, you can develop automation, which are typically, when I say automation, I'm going to focus on AI and robotics and so on. So those are another kind of investment which do not sort of, and at least contribute to the physical capital formation directly. So these are some of the main channel through which our model is going to work. Is it going to postulate that these two different kinds of capitals are complementary in the production process, whereas the latter is a substitute for labor in the production process. The latter is standard. The first one is something that we want to bring in here, and that assumption is going to play a very important role in our model predictions going forward. And then related to that, poorer economics face higher returns to conventional capital investment. Again, that comes from a sort of a neoclassical production technology where capital is scarce and conventional capital gives you, conventional investment gives you a very high rate of return. And that is what you are sort of, all investors are going to contemplate that vis-a-vis adopting the new technology even when they're available. And therefore, given this capital scarcity generates very, very high rate of return for all this conventional kind of investment, that endogenously creates a deterrence to adoption of this latest AI technologies. And therefore, that's going to be the mechanism through which the model is going to work. The model is a very, very simple model, as you're going to see going forward. But that would generate, therefore, a role of initial capital stock in explaining the endogenous adoption of automation technology and therefore the subsequent growth path. So the technical structure of the model, as I said, I will not go into too much detail, but I have to show you a little bit about the structure and why, how the decisions, how the returns are determined in this structure. So we have identical, as I said, I'm not going to delve at this point into intra-country inequality. So I'm going to assume that all households are identical. That's another layer that we can bring in the context of policy later. But at this point, the idea is that imagine that there is no distributional issues within a country. Even then, is the country better off adopting the latest automation technology? That's the question that we want to address. So we are going to assume identical households. The production structure, which is where all the sort of, answers are going to come from, is a more layered structure, but again, not very unfamiliar in the sense that this kind of structures are there in the literature. We have just adapted them to bring in the specific features of AI vis-a-vis conventional capital. So we have a final goods sector, which produces a homogeneous final good, and it uses labor, conventional capital, and various varieties of robots. So we have an intermediate goods sector which caters to the final goods sector, and the final goods sectors basically produce robots. But the robots are also differ in terms of their vintages. So we have old robots, the designs for which were sort of, came up earlier in the history. And then we have new forms of robot, which are really where new kind of new innovations in the technology are taking place and which are coming to the market and which are available freely to the product producers. So there is no technology barrier in this benchmark model. The old robots, which the designs have already been there, are now sort of, they're in the market and anybody can produce them. So they're competitively produced. The new robots are where there's patent rights, monopoly rights, and that's where the profitability of investment comes in. So the profitability of investment in this new robot technology comes in through the latter innovation in terms of new robots. And we have an R&D sector which caters to the designs of the new robots. So that's going to basically use capital to come up with new robots. And that's exactly where the necessity of capital comes in, because automation requires a capital investment. And therefore, if you have capital scarce, then what is the best sector to invest your capital, whether it should go to final goods sector or it should go to R&D to produce new design? That's going to be the central trade-off in our model. This is the production technology, which basically we don't take the task-based approach of Acemoglu-Restrepo. We actually look at the conventional substitution between capital labor and in our case also automated robots, which are basically the last two items inside the bracket. So it's basically the production structure by design is capturing certain important factors. One is that old and new robots are substitute for labor. So as you can see, they all come within the summation term, and robots complement conventional capital, and new robot designs, the A-hat, which are new robots, are going to come up through R&D sector. AT is the existing robots. If it's already there, that's also is contributing, but A-hat is where the latest technologies are coming up through that A-hat number of new robots. So once you have that production structure, really, this is the production function. Yes. There is constant returns yeah, there is. in the sense that the output of robots, what do you mean by that? So if I take,
If I double robots, I'm going to get double the output controlling for everything else.
if I double the robots, then I'm going to get, no, I won't get double the output. So you mean the number of robots or the quantity produced by the
I mean,
robots?
that summation X. So the alpha is on the X's, right?
Yes, so
Then
it's
you're
going to be, summing over is going to be 80 times
Yeah.
x to the power alpha. So if you double 80, that's not necessarily,
Individual.
yeah, it's not going to
It's
go
not
to,
a-
no, it's not, no. Because the robot comes in terms of 80, not that alpha. Alpha is the quantity of how many robots of different varieties. So here is going to be the marginal returns to all the factors given the production function. There are two things that I want to highlight here in the first two equations. One is that notice that the wage, because wage is sort of it's positively linked to the conventional capital. If the conventional capital goes up, the wage rate goes up. That's again is standard in any neoclassical technology. So if there is conventional capital KM which is going up, more and more resources are being invested to conventional final good production. That increases the productivity of labor. Laborers are better off if less capital goes to automated capital and more comes to conventional capital. RT, which is going to again play a very significant role in our model, is again a standard decreasing returns to capital, conventional capital coming from the final goods sector. But notice the term in the third bracket, it's positively given any level of conventional capital and it's diminishing in conventional capital. Higher investment in AT, higher AT, or the ATs are missing here, somehow they didn't appear, but higher number of new or old robots as well as higher labor going to the final goods sector is going to increase the productivity of conventional capital in final goods sector. And that is going to play an important role in the sense that as more and more robot comes in, it basically is going to make the conventional capital also more productive, but there will be a catch which I'm going to come back to later. Okay, so AT and A hat T going up as well as L bar going up means that for the same amount of conventional capital, the return curve is going to shift up. Demand for robot varieties, old and new, are standard. These are just generating, depending on their price level, this is just generating, producers in final goods are equating the marginal product of these two different varieties or vintages of robots to their prices. And these prices translate into quantities that are being produced in the robots, the intermediate goods sector. Old robot varieties are, once the design has been has been out there, anybody can imitate at zero cost, and therefore these are old varieties are produced by competitive producers, and therefore they charge a price equal to 1, and that generates a quantity of each of old variety vintages of robots of, this is again a standard result in this kind of product variety model, that they are basically same price 1. And that results into a certain quantity, but the quantity depends on the capital used in the final goods sector only because the demand for these quantities come from the final good production. New robot varieties, this is where somebody gets a design of a new variety and then produces. This is where all the profits come in, and they have they hold a patent, and because so these are all monopolies producer. They know their demand function, so they are going to charge the price which maximizes their profit. And in this kind of a setup, the profit is maximized at a price 1 by alpha. Alpha is a fraction, which means they're going to charge a price higher than the older vintages, and that translates into a demand for them. Again, the demand is going to be lesser than the older vintage because they're charging a higher price. But then again, the demand is going to depend on the final good production and the capital stock that goes to the final good production because it's going to come from there. And because of this relationship, the profitability of these new robot varieties, this is when the latest technology are being applied, depends on how much capital is being employed in the final goods sector. So that takes us to the R&D sector. And the R&D sector, again, as I said, it's a very standard assumption, except that in standard models, it depends on human capital and so on. Here we are saying that it depends on how much capital stock goes into, this is where I said that a crucial assumption is that development or adoption of this AI technology, even if you're buying it from, buying it from outside, not promoting, developing it yourself, it requires capital investment. So that equation over there really tells you that it depends on every unit of capital generates a delta amount of new varieties of capital. It depends on capital investment. This is a crucial assumption in our model. Once we say that that's basically, it's a capital allocated to new designs, which is going to determine number of new designs. After that, it follows the usual channel that basically, therefore, the patent price has to be equal to the profit being generated per unit of these new designs. And the profit, remember, comes from the production of this and applying them, selling them to the final goods sector. So free entry means that basically the profit being generated per unit of capital in the R&D sector, and then applying the patent right to production of the new varieties of goods eventually has to be equal to the alternative sources of investment capital, which is RT, which is coming from the production manufacturing sector, which means that we have an alternative sources of profit now, alternative returns to your capital investment, which is given in that RT equation at the end of the slide, which basically says that if you, in 1 unit of capital, if you invest in, instead of conventional manufacturing, if you invest in developing or importing AI technology, then that's going to be a profit margin, which comes because you can then produce that input and sell it to the market, and that market is going to give you this return. Yes. The returns will equate, and that is going to determine the path of capital allocation. Returns will equate. But, with certain conditions, and that is really the crux of the, but when is it that they're equal? So we now get 2 sources of return to your capital stock. Either you can invest it in the final good production. I've already shown you the RT there. Or you can invest it in adopting or importing new technologies, latest technologies, and that's the return that you're going to get through profit. So this is really the main mechanism in our model. So we now have 2 different returns to your investment of your capital stock. One is, which we call GMT, which is on the right hand side, is exactly what I had written earlier in terms of RT. So it was coming from the manufacturing sector. So that's the return coming from final goods production, except that I have taken earlier the KMT alpha was lying outside. Now I have taken it inside the bracket. So that is telling you how final good, if you have 1 unit of capital, if you invest it in final good production, then the return is going to look like the term G function given above. If the same unit of capital goes into production or importing of new technologies, of new robot technologies, then the return is going to look like given by the H function, which is given in the second term over here. Now, as you can see, optimally, you are going to compare as an investor, you are going to compare these 2 returns, and whenever the 2 returns are, one is greater than the other, your capital is going to flow to that sector. And when if the returns are exactly equal, then that's going to distribute your optimal allocation of your total capital stock between these 2 use of how much goes to final good production and how much goes to importing or developing the robotic technologies. And that really, that is really the key mechanism in our model, and we are going to equate them, and we are going to show when is it that they are not going to be equal. And the key thing to note here is the G function is a concave function, which means when the capital stock is, that goes to machine production is really low, you have very little capital, then that gives you a huge marginal product. Whereas the latter one, like a conventional assumption, is a linear production, and that's going to create a threshold. So that for low economies, it's really the conventional capital which is going to generate a lot of return, and therefore there is no incentive for these people to invest in or even importing robot capital, even if the technology is freely available to them. So not freely, but at a cost, and the cost is whatever that delta. So then we sort of, that rest, this is really the main mechanism. Then we go into the capital formation and dynamics and what happens over time. How does capital total capital gets allocated. So you can have two different models here. We stuck to a standard OLG model where basically the workers are doing all the capital formation and savings, and therefore the next period's capital formation depends on the wage rate. We also have an alternative model where we imposed a solo type story where basically everybody saves a constant fraction of their total income. So that generates a different capital formation equation. The only difference between the two is that in the first case, we go to a steady state. In the second case, perpetual growth is possible. But we are in this presentation, I'm going to stick to the original OLG structure, which basically says that given log utility and so on, all the people are spending better proportion of their wage income in capital formation, which gives us a capital formation equation which looks like this. And that's really is the wage income that I had shown you earlier. So that basically says that the wage income is next period's capital stock, overall capital stock, not the distribution, is going to depend on the wage rate, and that's the function of the wage rate. And automation dynamics is determined by exactly what I had, delta times the money that's flowing into the automation capital. And then I've assumed that there is also the previous stock also is sort of, stays there with some depreciation rate. So that's going to be the amount of sort of automated capital that's going to be generated. Part of it's the old stock, part of it is the new stock over time. So as I said, that savings behavior and capital accumulation is going to determine the first part of the equation. And the second part of the equation, to the extent that KT minus KM is the investment flowing to the automation sector, that's where the profitability of automation vis-a-vis the alternative return is going to come in. And because of this comparison, we get a threshold level of capital stock for every unit of historical automation capital. And we are assuming that for developing countries that historical automation capital is zero, or every country historically start with a zero automation capital. So, but for every level of capital stock, you get a threshold level of corresponding, a threshold capital stock such that the two returns are equal. But as I've already pointed out, because the G function is concave and H function is linear, for low levels of capital stock, the G function dominates. So basically that means that there exists for any economy where historically imagine that AT is equal to 0, then an poor economy which is starting with a very, very slow benchmark, low capital stock, which is below the K tilde A0, is going to not find automation profitable at all. All its capital will going to flow into conventional capital. And then if conventional capital grows at a certain rate, then only after some point of time you reach the stage when automation becomes profitable for you, and after that robot adoption is going to accelerate. So the entire mechanism is built around this comparing rate of returns in the investment opportunities. And given this, that's basically is what's there in the model. It's nothing, more than this. And given this, with the dynamics that plays up, depending on whether we have a solo type framework or an OLG framework. We either in the OLG framework, the economies goes to multiple steady states, high, low. In the solo kind of framework, there's perpetual growth, but at differential balance growth paths. But in this kind of economy, what we find is that low capital scarce economies, which we identified with developing economies, are going to invest more. It makes sense for them to invest more in conventional capital. That's where the returns are higher. They go for little automation, and they are obviously have correspondingly low growth, but that low growth is an outcome of their optimal investment decision. It's not because of non-availability of technology. It's not because of any political economic consideration. Whereas high capital economies, because the rate of return has now fallen enough in the conventional capital, for them it makes sense to switch to automation capital. And these are the economies which are going to have more and more automation over time. And that's basically explained the observed path of adoption of automation across countries to our mind. What is more interesting, and this is where I want your feedback on, is that in some sense the model also predicts something which is sort of optimistic in some sense, because there's a lot of doomsday prediction regarding automation, and eventually it's going to dominate, and eventually labor is going to become completely obsolete, and so the economy is going to switch to automated capital, producing more and more automated capital, and so on and so forth. Turns out that in our model, even in our, given the setup and it's specific to the setup that we have, automation can, become self-limiting. And the reason why automation becomes self-limiting is again because of the fact that if not much capital flows into conventional capital, then the marginal return is very, very high. So in some sense, that's going to restrict the degree of automation adoption, because the return to, as more and more conventional capital gets in, the return to marginal return to conventional capital is higher than the marginal return to robotic capital, which remains constant. And that basically, that particular feature, if it's, subject to its empirical verification, is what generates a possibility that actually complete automation never happens, because you always want a little bit of conventional capital to go with that. And because of this complementarity, labor also doesn't become completely obsolete. The wages fall, but it doesn't become completely obsolete. So that in some sense is a more positive result coming out of this framework. And then the key theoretical insights are, as I said, that automation depends on capital accumulation, but capital scarcity discourages automation adoption endogenously as profit consideration, not because of any exogenous equity reasons or political economy reasons. And rich countries automate faster because they have more resources, and their conventional channels returns are already saturated. Therefore, for them, it makes sense to go for more automated capital. That's not true about less developed economies, and therefore it generates multiple development paths. One is an automated growth path, one is a non so automated conventional growth path, and then, but ultimately, automation also in developing countries becomes self-limiting, simply because it also has to compete even in those countries with the conventional channels. Now, given this structure, then, we haven't done a sort of, trying to take it to data and do a structural estimation whether these channels are really substantiated by cross-country regression and so on. That's in the agenda. But we tried to fit the model prediction to some key empirical facts, and it seems that it is fitting to those facts. Robot intensity is higher in advanced economies, and our model predicts that. Automation adoption is strongly correlated to capital intensity. Again, this result is coming from various empirical literature, and our model actually says the same thing. And there are existing empirical literature which are also saying that AI and automation require complementary investment in all kind of infrastructure, computer capacity, R&D ecosystem. So in a way, for us, that's captured by the fact that there's a complementarity between conventional capital and automative capital. And therefore, it makes sense for developing countries not to go for these automation-based technologies, even for the capitalist point of view. So because that gives them less return compared to the standard investment channels. So finally, the policy implications, and this is where sort of when I'm looking forward to inputs from all of you, which is that when we are thinking about policies, so and we are looking at the policy literature, one is a lot of policy question revolves around the distribution aspect. So we have sort of, not talked about the distribution, brought in the distribution here at all. We can think about what happens to capital and labor along these two growth paths, but at this point we have sort of refrained from going there because there's already a lot of work about that. But then it also suggests that if this is the mechanism that plays in a laissez-faire economy, then there is a traditional argument which says that the governments, when in the presence of this kind of technology, has this face this equity efficiency trade-off. If you want to go for high growth, then it creates inefficiency and so on. So basically, or inequity and so on and so forth. So our model is suggesting that fast growth through automation technology may not only be unfavorable to labor, but it may be not suitable for the capital owners as well. So in a way, for us, that's a kind of framework which says that efficiency and equity can go hand in hand if this is the mechanism which is in operation. And it also therefore suggests that capital scarce economies are drive to get the best technology, the most automated, latest technology may not be the right way to go for high growth regime. Maybe the capital scarce technology are better off even from the growth perspective to stick to the conventional capital for some time until the capital stock becomes enough the economy generates enough capital stock so that returns from automotive technology then kicks in and start to dominate the returns from conventional capital. So gradual organic way of automation seems to be a better policy suited to everybody in the economy, including the capital owners themselves. So policies promoting the latest technology may not be the best policy to go into a high growth regime, even for people who are involved in this kind of investment. So I'll just stop here, and I really look forward to, this is a work in progress. I really look forward to your feedback, both in terms of the empirical question, model validity, and of course, policy issues.
Thank you, Maushami, for that very, very interesting, very, very clean kind of a modeling setup, coming up with very lucid kind of outcomes. It relies on an overlapping generations economy with homogeneous labor. Yeah. And on the production side, you have automation or robotization being complementary to conventional capital, but it substitutes labor. Yeah. And then on the R&D side, it's like product variety and blueprints being presented, being generated, essentially driven by incentives, profit model. And these patterns, the blueprints, they have a life of one time period.
Yes.
If I could, yeah. So it's not.
No, it's not. So it's basically the patent life has been normalized to one period. Yeah. So I can allow for more patents, but that just complicates some more.
Sure. So a very, very interesting framework coming up with very important development implications. The way I would sort of, just a couple of comments, and then, we will have the floor open for discussion. In an OLG structure, it's very easy to sort of look at, skilled, unskilled labor differentiation. And there is this emergence of a lot of literature on how automation is skill biased. So and oftentimes the direction of technical change is also, determined by the skilled, unskilled labor force mix. And in an OLG structure, it's very easy to sort of incorporate endogenize skill acquisition decisions, either through bequests or generally just adults, allocating apportioning a part of their time to acquiring new skills. So some of those aspects would be very interesting to look at. And in the production structure, then you could have, skilled labor and robotic kind of complementarity and not so much capital. And then this skilled labor also goes into producing blueprints in the R&D sector. I mean, these are just some immediate thoughts, but very, very interesting and some very important outcomes in terms of also divergence, across developing economies in the kind of context that you present, and a lot of room for, policy design and to sort of make it work for developing countries. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure.
Do you want me to respond now? Shall I?
It's really up to you.
No, because that's kind of an I'll remember. Yeah. So the OLG structure is really a limitation of the model. That's why I said that, we tried with Solo, the dynamics were easier to handle. But really, if we want to talk about welfare, I'm saying that better for everybody. That is a loose statement. If I want to make that, I have to have a sort of, infinite horizon model. That's easy to incorporate. It's just that the dynamics for us was becoming slightly complicated. So as a shortcut, we looked at the OLG. But sure. That is something that we are working on. And I think, OLG structure itself is limited because in a standard OLG structure, all the savings are coming from the workers alone. So in a way, you are leaving a certain income, which is not being tapped for future capital accumulation as well, which is a limitation. So we recognize that. That's why we thought that, okay, Solo could be a substitute, which keeps things simple, but, allows us to look at capital being augmented coming from the entire income. But even that is not suitable to do any welfare analysis. So of course, we have to bring in a infinite horizon identical representative agent models. That's doable, but sort of, I didn't include it here because we don't have the entire dynamics worked out yet for that. For the skill, unskill, so a lot of work has been done on that angle. So in a way, for us, we felt that why is it that it's only so a lot of empirical literature is saying that new technologies are not only skill intensive, and in some sense, the newest technologies are replacing even skilled labor. So therefore, differentiating between skill and unskilled labor is probably not the margin at which we want to play with. We want to play with the margin that it's really every kind of investment requires capital. So if I'm a capitalist, what is the best investment for me? And that's the angle that we thought that it would be interesting, and we found relatively unexplored in the literature. So that's why we focused on that. Sure, we can bring in unskilled labor. We can expand the production structure to make it complementary to physical capital and to robotic capital, and to some extent substitutability, and we can play around with the degree of substitution. But to our mind, that's not a sort of a new question, and the answers are relatively well known. So that's why we didn't go there. Yeah.
No, thank you. The floor is open to questions. Yes, please. Yeah.
Very interesting, very nice talk. I just had the traditional narrative surrounding robotization and AI and all, it's all about labor-saving technologies. So you've kind of framed it as capital scarce versus. Now, it is true that poor countries are capital scarce. So the question, though, in terms of our traditional neoclassical models, is about the relative. Are you labor abundant in a relative sense, or are you labor scarce? And the standard mechanism that we've always talked about is the fact that you're scarce. If you have scarce labor, you're trying to find labor saving because the returns to labor are too high, and that's what you're trying to economize on. You kind of rig the model a little bit by having this, robot sector that is only using capital. And so you've created like a linearity here and a concavity there. And so, you can get stuck in corners. So if you sort of make those technologies somewhat more, and this is sort of related to what you were saying, robots don't arise in a vacuum. I mean, it's not just I put in machines and out pop robots. I mean, we do have people working with them, and human capital is a key part of it. And so what investment paths we're going to be seeing in order to invest, in order to save on, labor, is related to what human capital you have. So I think that is a fundamental piece of what trajectories people take. So it's not so surprising that the richer countries are the ones that are investing in this, because labor is getting more and more expensive, and they are also, as they get richer, human capital grows. So they find this technology becoming more affordable because they can invest in this. I think it's a margin that seems to be missing, but you do have, either in the OLG or, to have a little bit of schooling to have and to convexify both these technologies so that you don't start getting into corners. Maybe a mechanism to kind of think of, because it just seems a bit rigged at the moment to get what you want.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The model is rich to focus on capital, and labor is fixed, and labor is fully employed, by the way. There is no unemployment, and the wages are going down, and in some cases wages are going up because your conventional capital is complementary. Then after that it starts falling the moment you move to an automated regime. But so absolutely we can make it more general. We can convexify the R&D technology also, to make it's right now it's linear, and that gives you a sort of, comparison becomes easier. But we can say the degree of convexity, suppose we say that, so I need motivating examples, empirical evidence for that. But if it's more convex in conventional, return is sort of, marginal return falls more, sort of is higher as long as marginal returns are higher in the conventional investment vis-a-vis the robotic investment, despite being the convexity, and that depends on the degree of convexity, the results would go through. So in a way, I see that as a simplification, but not something, I take your point, but this is something that I think we can work around, and we can write the model in terms of, instead of capital, we can write it in terms of capital labor ratio, which is the conventional way of doing that. Skill labor, as I said, we deliberately wanted to avoid that distinction because we thought that a lot of these are playing around the return to capital per unit of labor. Maybe we have ignored that, but it's really the capital margin which makes it investor invest in these two, rather than the skill, what is happening and the skill dimension. So we wanted to ignore that fact. We can bring that in, but our main mechanism is that, when I'm an industrialist, which one is giving me higher return? Yes, the model is rigged because one is giving you a constant return, the other one is, when it's shooting up. But we can make the other one also concave. But to the extent that one dominates when capital is low than the other one, we might get, we'll probably recover our results.
I think that's what I'm trying to say, that I don't see that directly, because if you think there is so just take a Cobb-Douglas technology. Instead of having linear, you have K to the alpha or something. If you set the other factor to 0, the returns are going to be so high, you're never going to shut it down. You're always going to have some L going in there. That's what I mean by having just a simple Inada thing will kill that corner.
Yes, it will. And then you are going to go to the fact that one is constant, the other one is concave. Yeah. No. I think his point is very important, which is that, and that is indeed the rigging that we have done, because R&D technologies are typically projected as typically linear in human capital. And we said, why human capital? It could be linear. Imagine you're importing the technology, right? So you spend so much time, so much money, and you get this technology from so many units of new technology. And that's the thinking that went in. But along with that, of course, it brought in this feature that, it takes times to go into that return, because the other one is always dominating initially in terms of return. But then to our mind, that probably is not, I think we have to look at the empirical literature, but that probably not a bad description of your investment opportunities when you are really a capital scarce economy. If you build roads and airports, maybe your returns are higher than you are bringing in the latest AI technology. So that's something that probably is an empirical question, but a point is surely well taken.
Moshomedi, thank you very much. Somewhat related to his point, I was thinking the low wage rate is the key factor, whether the labor saving devices would be implemented or not. For example, unlike in Europe or US, we don't buy dishwashers here because, somebody would come and do the dishes at throwaway prices. And we use in JNU flat the Roomba to clean our floors, but my mother in Chandanagar would never think of buying a Roomba, because the wage rate is very less there. So that is one of the key factors, if not the only key factor, behind implementation of labor saving devices in my mind. So how in your kind of setup, the wage differential between developing countries and developed countries are being captured?
So this is full employment economy where labor goes into only one sector, right? So there's no alternative for labor. So L bar goes into manufacturing, and it's sort of, whether wage rate is going up, going down, depends on the path of development that you are taking. Initially with if automation capital comes in, then of course wage rate keeps falling. But if you are growing along the conventional channel, then wage rate as capital stock gets generated, it's complementary to labor, and labor returns to labor goes up. But the point is, I think the more important point is from a developing economies perspective, and again, that is something that we are looking into for sure. And again, it's we are working out the dynamics, is that I think the more important thing is that if you have an alternative sector, let us say, which this is, let's say one way of looking at the manufacturing sector. Imagine that there is an informal sector somewhere where there's an alternative to labor. So if the labor is not, because of the wage rate, labor is not finding employment here, there is an alternative wage rate somewhere, which way they can go and work, maybe as gig workers, maybe as agriculture laborers, whatever. So suppose we bring in an alternative sector, which is going to provide a floor to the wage rate, then that's going to impact all this mechanization decision. And in those cases, the preliminary results suggest that the economy will move into, the formal economy will move into a path of automation adoption much earlier, simply because the wages here, they are kind of, growing and the wages are falling, but at some point they're going to switch wages are rising initially, but that's at some point that's going to eat up into your profitability of conventional capital, and then you're going to move to automation capital. The moment that happens, some of this labor is going to get displaced and go into the other sector. So that providing that floor will impact the time of adoption of automation technology, and surely is going to affect the dynamics. And that's something that we are aware of. we are working on that. And that typically has to be, we have to take that into account. We are thinking about a developing economy with a informal sector providing a floor so that, you cannot go on depressing labor wages beyond that point. That will have implication both ways, both for the profitability of conventional channel as well as the returns to labor coming from the economy as a whole. Sure. But that's something we already have incorporated. But again, as I said, two things that we have incorporated in the current version is an optimizing household and sort of floor for labor, allowing for an alternative sector. But the results are not kind of fully worked out yet. But sure, that is a natural way to think about labor in a developing country context.
Thank you. Really, very nice paper, Chair said, very neat. And very comforting for us.
Well, that's what I wonder. I mean, is it really that comforting? Because it's an
Got a lot of knowledge and what it experience. That's the neoclassical model about technical change. And India is not good, but I'm thinking is if you're looking at firms in the United States and China, for instance, or maybe firms in Korea, is this the right lens through which to look at the way competition works? Or should we not think in terms of sort of Schumpeterian competition for survival? Because if it's that kind of battle that's going on, then, these adjustments to optimize profit at the margin, is that really the most insightful way to look at it? So my question, not about your specification, which is, I have no problem in that, but about the lens or the approach.
No, that's a very good point, Sudipta. And I think our model can accommodate that kind of process, Schumpeterian process, if we allow for the fact that new designs come and makes the old designs obsolete. Right now, we have the old design staying over there as a sort of, being produced and contributing to the production process. So imagine a process where a new, and so that basically means that but effectively, that's going to shut down one particular part of the production process because everything that's going to be conventionally produced, now the old designs are gone and new designs come in. But I'm not sure, to my mind, just offhand thinking about it, introducing that kind of a Schumpeterian process, which old designs are obsolete, new design come in, they're also going to look at profitability after all. And that's what our new producers are also looking at. Right. So when I'm thinking about, even as a Schumpeterian producer or inventor, if I'm thinking about, I have access to capital or I can rent in capital from the banks or whatever. And if I'm thinking about whether to go for this modern technologies, or maybe there are other channels, the same profitability question should come up for a Schumpeterian investor as well. No? So is it the case that the invention, is it worthwhile for me to invest and spend whatever money on this particular innovation, which may pick up and then give me monopoly profit, and therefore the profitability question vis-a-vis, should I just go for, as I said, building bridges, building airports, building roads? I also know, but that's really an empirical question in some sense.
Point is that again, when you respond to but if it's about survival, the game.
I see.
Forget all the marginal components.
I see. Yeah. No, that's a different context altogether. And I think that's an important question. We should think about that how do farms and existing farms endogenously sort of adapt something, maybe a version of the new technology to survive so that the new technologies don't dominate. Yeah, that's a completely different dimension. Yeah, but it's worth thinking about. No, absolutely. But it's worth thinking about since we are, thinking about policy implications. Sure.
Thank you, Musumidi, for nice presentation. I understand most of the things, but I am ignorant of theory and macro and that thing because I work on different aspect of that thing. My question is that I see that what is the role of the government here? Because the thing is that I think this is the market basically where the savings is mostly coming from the wage. And as you mentioned, the capital formation is coming from the savings, and that is from the selling of my labor. But also the capital gains, my profitability that Sad has already pointed out, right? So government as a authority to tax has anything to do here. Basically, if I tax the capital gains, or if I tax the say wage income, personal income tax, or corporate income tax, or capital gain tax, how this model is going to work? Because it is not only the savings of the individuals, but savings of the corporate sector that will go to the capital investment. So that's mine.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right that this is a completely laissez-faire model. So basically, there's no government. Not only there's no government, the economy is sort of at its so to speak efficient best because you're going for the highest return for your capital investment. The government, the policy question, that's why it came at the last slide, is that the policy question comes in. Typically, the policy questions are framed around equity. So if you look at the literature, that it's basically the should we compensate the labor because it's going to get affected whenever automation comes in and all? That's an equity question. So the government intervention is justified on issues of equity. We are trying to say that, well, that's right now we are silent on that. We can't even talk about those questions or whether this path is welfare improving than the other part. Should the government hasten the automation adoption process by incentivizing, let's say, return to automation capital at the cost of conventional capital? That policy question, as I told earlier to Mita's question, is that that becomes a welfare question. And at this point, whether it's good or bad, it's kind of coming from the growth perspective, not so much from the welfare perspective. So our model right now is not equipped to answer that kind of question. But that is the relevant question. You are right that it's basically growth promotion. Yes, you want to go for automation because that's going to generate higher growth trajectory for sure. But right now we are saying that for low economies, it's not in the market is not going to do that. And then the question is that if the households are forward looking enough, thinking about the future growth process, then does it make sense for the government to subsidize automation technologies right now so that you reap the benefit in future? That is really the welfare question, which is related to government policy. At this point, at this juncture, the OLG structure or even the solo structure doesn't allow you to look at that question. And that's exactly what we want to go to. That's a very valid point. Right now, I don't have the answer, but I need that answer coming out of the model eventually.
So in the interest of time, there's time for two more questions. So over to you, Rudrani, and then you. Okay? Yeah.
So I have precisely two questions. So in your model, the adoption is a function of, it's a capital intensive and also uses labor and no, it uses only capital.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking, if suppose that a production of robots require highly intensive capital sector, whereas adoption can be done by a lower level of capital with more of labor, because adoption means like if you get the technology, you can just use some labor to
Imitation kind of thing. Yeah.
operate it and something. So how will is it then you can have countries which there are some countries which will produce robots and some countries which will actually adopting the robots. They will just take the technology from them, and because they don't have to use capital in adoption, just not that much there. So how will the dynamics will change? That is one question. The other one is because of, you said that at some point of time there will be a stagnation in the adoption of robotics. There will be no in the low capital countries. So given the diminishing returns of conventional capital, will the growth rate of those countries also decline over time?
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So basically the idea is that, and that's exactly why I said that when I said, okay, step by step. So adoption vis-a-vis imitation, in a way, that's just a matter of semantics. Because when I say that this is the R&D technology, you can think about that R&D technology requiring capital. If you have to get the technology from outside, buy the technology from outside, you have to make some capital investment, and delta is how much, in some sense, that, you have to pay per unit. So how many new technologies you get from abroad. And alternative interpretation could be that you develop it in your country, but it's still capital intensive. So the delta multiplied by how much capital you're going to the R&D sector, that interpretation really doesn't matter. It depends on, and then I can have another sector which is, getting it at a lower delta, per unit of cost goes down, but that's not going to make a difference to the, whether it's a, so the mechanism doesn't play through that angle, because I can call it whatever, you can interpret it in which. That's why I said that, it's not whether it's bringing technology from outside or indigenous development of the technology, because it depends on capital. Either way, you need capital to get it from outside as well as develop it indigenously. If you bring in skilled labor, that's a different issue, because then you need skilled labor domestically. So that is probably not a very crucial question, will make a crucial difference. But yes, of course, because the growth rates are dependent on the returns to capital for sure. So definitely the growth patterns will be different. And that's what I said, that growth wise, therefore, it does not make sense for the developing countries to go for that, because they can attain higher growth through standard capital accumulation channel, which are giving them higher return anyway. And that's what a laissez-faire economy will do anyway. So the question is that should we, if that latest technology is available, it's almost like saying adoption of inappropriate technology. You have the technology available, it's the latest technology, but really for your country's perspective, even from the growth perspective, that may not be the best technology. There's a literature out there about adoption of inappropriate technology. So my model sort of talks to that literature, that for you,
what I was thinking, in your final goods production sector, it requires capital as well as labor, and it's like a constant returns on capital and labor.
Yeah.
So that if your adoption, if your robots remains constant, there is no innovation, no adoption, nothing.
Yeah.
Then your return to capital, conventional capital, will decline.
Yeah.
So that means that
that's why at some point you are going to switch to the other one. So it is declining, but initially it's higher. As long as it's higher, there's no incentive to switch to that. But of course it's falling, and at some point you want to switch over. But there's no reason to push it to that level, because it doesn't make sense at this point for a laissez-faire economy to do that for a developing economy. That's the idea. Eventually it will get there, because you're going to saturate all your returns from conventional capital. Sorry, I think we are, so yeah.
Das ma'am, thank you so much for bringing this insight, especially the inequality at a time when this emerging technology and automation. I'm interested with the long run growth, particularly when you mentioned about the automation saturation. In this, is this saturation going to automation saturation going to reduce the inequality, or is it the Schumpeterian kind of like innovation, or when the innovation comes to an end, the capitalism is going to decline? And is it, I'm interested in this particular notion where we had this industrial revolution and then this technological revolution. After this automated this saturation, are we also expecting another kind of revolution where it would also leads to another round of revolution, which will keep inequality to rise? Or I'm particularly interested in this long run trajectory that you have mentioned.
So I presume you're talking about the long run trajectory of individual income within the country, right? So there are there are the wage earners vis-a-vis the profit earners, or capital owners vis-a-vis the workers, and how that their sort of income is going to evolve over time. That's the inequality that, or that's the dimension that you want to talk about. So the point is that as long as you are on a conventional capital driven growth regime, the workers are getting better off with growth. Okay, because that conventional capital is actually complementary to your wage income. So that's a phase of, let us say, golden age of capitalism, where capital is growing, growth is happening, and workers are also benefiting from that. The moment you get into automation capital, the wages starts to decline. So the point is, that's when the tension of the inequality, all these distribution issues that people are talking about, they kick in at that point. But the point is, our model, because the capital, because of this assumption, and that's really an empirical question, to what extent adoption of automation also depends on the availability of capital stock and how capital intensive it is. That's where the question comes in. If it still requires capital investment and you need people to invest in capital, and that capital can also go into production process to generate certain returns, the demand for labor is not ever going to go to zero. Yes, it will fall, but at some point the wage rate will stabilize at a certain optimal capital distribution between the modern sector and the innovation sector or the automating sector. That's when the returns are equalized. So that is why that kind of, doomsday prediction is not appearing in our model, simply because at some point the decline will stop. That's going to, you reach a steady state balance level of automation, let us say. Now, that's happening precisely, as many people have pointed out, because that crucial assumption that automation itself depends on availability of capital and there is an alternative channel where the return fluctuates. So if that, really the empirical challenge for this paper is to validate that assumption. And that's where I'm sort of, looking for clues about whether that's a reasonable assumption. Not everything depends on that. And if that happens, then automation is not so bad even in the long run. You are going to survive. I mean, the workers are going to survive. But whether that happens or not depends crucially on this particular specific assumption that drives the results in our model.
Sure. I think with this, we'll close the session. Very relevant, very interactive. It's evidenced by the fact the amount of discussion it generated. Thank you so much, Maushami, for sort of sharing your work with us.